It's simple. I'm not going to be long-winded tonight. I'm simply concerned because we have so we had to attend, unfortunately, a venue that is a young lady that, who we knew. She passed away. She's a lot younger than us. That is my wife and me. This is not always easy to deal with. And the reason that this show, and it's really not a show, it's just me sharing my thoughts on condemnation. I guess I'm tired of all the condemnation that atheists and theists alike put on each other. For years now, my wife has spent a lot of time trying to, quote unquote, minister to this young lady. She was in her early 50s, and now she's gone. The struggle in her life was that she lived in hell. Yes, she lived in hell. Her mom thought she was going to hell. And the reason that she lived in hell, it's because she wasn't heterosexual. Everyone in her family thought that she was going to burn and burn and burn and be tortured forever by this maniacal God, simply because she didn't give her heart and life to Jesus Christ. She didn't follow the rules and the regulations or the faith or whatever in baptism. She found someone that was of the same gender and fell in love with her. This is difficult. My wife kept telling her, hey, listen, you need to understand something about the text. And yes, sometimes you have to take people to the text, that is the biblical text, to demonstrate that, in a very measured way, Dr. Ann Nyland has done a lot of work. She's the best lexical theorist in the world. And yes, she has proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that none of these authors were they were not authoring anything against homosexuality. And yet, people who live by the text, they don't want to live by the best of translation modeling. They commit themselves to these mindsets, these models that continue to make life hell on earth. And I guess my point is this, and it's simple. I'm not going to be long-winded tonight. I'm simply concerned because we have so many people. I'm being told that we have a very bad audio and video delay. Sorry. But here's my concern. The reason I'm hesitating, I'm trying to keep from crying because I'm a very sensitive person. We went to this event. It was out on the water, beautiful setting. All of these awesome people. Most of the people there were part of the LGBT community, and hopefully you guys can accept that. And some of these people, they actually know what it means to grow up in hell. And simply because, they've heard all the condemnation all of their lives, and now one of their loved ones, one of our loved ones is now gone. They wanted to have just a little bit of hope. Yeah, just a little bit of hope. I'd love to see her again. Yes, I want to see her again. I hope she's looking down. In other words, people can come by, and yes, so many atheists are saying, get over it. There's, life after death, blah, blah, blah. Some people are just trying to destroy, the hope in these settings, and I just don't get that. I don't get the fundamentalist in Christianity, and I don't get the fundamentalist in atheism, because it seems like from time to time we may have to tell ourselves stories just to deal with our reality. And if any of you guys out there really think that we have an objective view toward reality, rethink that one. I mean, the best thing that we have going for us right now is a very, very subjective view of reality. And I guess my point is, why all of the condemnation? What motivates people to be so full of themselves that they don't mind preaching hellfire and brimstone to condemn them while they're alive, and then other people want to say, well, no, your loved one is just dead, no life after death. We don't know. I mean, but if this is just something for these people to pretend and say, hey, listen, no, she's looking down, whatever, why not give them that comfort? My grandson, sometimes he needs a teddy bear. I'm not going to take that away from him. I'm not going to take that away from him. These people are hurting. They need comfort. And I'm just tired of all the condemnation, and I hope that you are. Hopefully we can come together and have conversations that build one another up. Not in the faith, so to speak, but why can't we just get along? Why can't we have conversations that are about how we can better each other, that is, motivate each other toward something positive? And please understand, not all of us grew up in hell, but some of us did. And those of us who grew up in hell, sometimes we might write a theology simply to create a pathway of hope. What's wrong with that? And so this isn't really about philosophical debate at all tonight. This really isn't about that. This is about how people are struggling to survive. And so, for some of you, this will make sense. They sang several songs in celebrating her life. Then they asked us to take out this little thing that looks like this. I used to do this when I was a kid. Not very good at this. And the bubbles were all over the place. I mean, it was like a sea of bubbles. And these people were, hand in hand. We were there with them. People crying, smiling, rejoicing, reflecting, simply celebrating life. Some of them thinking, oh, she can see this. She can touch the bubbles. Bubbles was very much a part of who she was. I mean, she enjoyed that. And so my question is, can we live, that is in our conversations, that is in our relationships with each other, can we live without the condemnation? I think so. I don't think that we need to become so dogmatic on either side of the great debate that we start saying, no, you can't think this way. You're delusional. And so I'm going to advocate comfort. I'm going to advocate sometimes we may need comfort, and it may come in various forms for different people. We're not all the same. And so today, I celebrate. You may think I'm just blowing bubbles. But in reality, or in my construct of reality, I think Dr. Holman, I think is his name, he said that the brain actually constructs reality. In other words, what we sense is constructed by the brain, and then it's reconstructed and reconstructed and reconstructed. So objective reality, perhaps we need to blow some bubbles a little bit more and rethink that one. I hope that you can find it in yourself. I really do. I hope that you can find it in yourself to be kind. I hope that you can find it in yourself to comfort someone, simply to reach out and say, hey, listen, I can comfort you. I don't have to demand my own way. I don't have to get you to think like me. In fact, I want to read something for a moment. Makes sense to me. This particular psychiatrist states it this way. When you judge something, find a reliable source to learn more about it. I mean, isn't that true in all of our lives? So many people get stuck in, let's say, a Christian model or a Christian worldview. Perhaps we need to, instead of just accepting it, maybe we need to look at it. Let's look at some different sources and find its roots, look at the history, and the other side of the story, if you will. Yeah. Look at it through someone else's eyes. Number two, this person, yes, a psychiatrist says, challenge your mind when it gets trapped in confirmation bias. I've been there. I've been so full of myself for years. I admit I've been, for the most part of my life, I lived indoctrinated. I don't know if all of it's gone. Probably 99% is still there. I don't know. But I do know that I need your help. And you need mine possibly from time to time. But I need to challenge. I need to challenge my own mind. And I can't challenge my mind sometimes by myself. I need someone to challenge me. But I need someone to do this in the context of humility sometimes, because, you know, when people are harsh and condemning, it just doesn't work, does it? So this psychiatrist said, challenge your mind when it gets trapped in a confirmation bias or this mental set, quote unquote, or this belief that just stays there. Some of you know what I'm talking about, a belief that's just hangs on. It's like being anchored. It won't let go. This psychiatrist actually says these are all limiting. Yes, limiting to your existence. He goes on to say, practice expanding your sense of compassion. Listen to this. This is not me saying this. This is someone who really deals with behavior and all of that. Practice expanding your sense of compassion to those whom you don't know. In other words, if you're an atheist, reach to the other side of the coin. Reach out a little bit and say, hey, I need to expand, draw my circle a little bit larger. My circle of discourse. Wow, if it could be larger, what would that do for me? My circle of compassion. Move out of your comfort zone and expand your horizon. Practice unconditional regards. This author says, yes, this will be quite fulfilling as an experience. We're talking about, yes, something subjective, but that's all right. It's all right to be subjective. That is, when it comes to reality. That's going a little bit too far to say that we have an objective view. Number 4, learn to accept yourself. That's what she was going through. All of her life, she couldn't accept herself because she heard from the church, yes, from the church, all kinds of condemnation, hellfire and brimstone. You're not right with God. This standard of perfectionism was shoved down her throat. Everyone's worried, and my wife and I are sharing, hey, no, you've misunderstood the text. They're saying heretic, heretic, heretic. We're not going to listen to you. We're praying for her salvation. She felt condemned all the days of her life, and from time to time, she felt loved by someone of the same sex. And those same people, the one she loved, the one that she bonded with, was in union with. She would like to think, yes, tonight, as she's hurting, she would like to think that she will be able to see her again. My question to you is, why condemn her and say, no, that's not going to happen. Let's look at all the empirical models, blah, 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 yeah. What's going on? As you can tell, I'm a bit tired because, when you're dealing with people in pain, people really suffering, they don't need all the blah, blah, blah. Philosophy will fail you. Philosophy is not good for everything. Hello? Come on, talk to me now. Philosophy is good within itself. It's not something that can work outside of its box. Yes, you've heard it here. Sometimes people get stuck in that box called philosophy. Learn to accept yourself, and only then you can project that onto others. Wow, that's a powerful thing. It may be true that I can read, that is, from what a pen does on paper, that is from the viewpoint of a psychiatrist, and this may be better than what I read in the book of Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, or Acts, Romans, and the rest of these books. It may be better, but sometimes what people feel is condemnation. They feel pushed. And if we will simply say, just give it a try, read some of this. Learn to accept yourself. I remember growing up as a person who could not accept myself for who I actually was, simply because I was told that I was wicked, I was wretched, I was, not good enough to even stand in God's presence. And so at the age of 4, I had to get saved. And so it felt positive to me. I want you to hear this. It felt like a positive thing to me to be saved and sanctified by the washing and the cleansing aspects of the blood of Jesus. I felt saved. I felt good. I felt all of those things. And so that which I counted as positive was actually working against me. Now, it wasn't someone who got dogmatic with philosophy that changed me. What changed me was when I met and was confronted by people who were ever so kind and humble and gentle. And so in time I changed. I could go on, but here's my point. Atheists and theists alike need to quit condemning one another. We need to have a conversation, and our conversation needs to be seasoned with gentleness, with understanding. And yes, when we're having a conversation, very little of what we are talking about, very little in that exchange will we actually understand at that particular time. In other words, what we're hearing surface structure. We're hearing words. And yes, when I hear you and you hear me, typically what we do is we render it so quickly, we don't even give enough time for the deeper structure. That is the intent of the author and all of that. God forbid that we dig into that. Wow. I do apologize about the audio and the video. This wasn't set up to do this tonight, but this is how it goes sometimes. And so, I don't know about you, but I would rather be a person who has a sense of balance, a lot of compassion. If your strong suit is philosophy, please understand that others may have a strong suit, and it may be sociology. Someone else may have a strong suit, and it may be humility. Someone else may have a strong suit, and it may be maybe just to be able to sing a song. I don't know. But let's work with each other's strengths instead of against each other's weaknesses. I'm simply saying that I saw a lot of people suffering, and we were hurting as well. And I would hate to think that what I hear in the great debate would have been good for anyone there this evening. With that said, I hope that you will join us again and again and again. Let's try to make sense of this mess. Let's do better, okay? We love you very much. Wow. Lots of things are going on today. We had the beginning of a hearing. Many people are taking sides. We will be talking about a little of that a little bit later in the show, but I want to start out with what took place yesterday. I was watching television. Yes, I was watching the Dallas Cowboys as their quarterback was attempting to run. His name is Dak Prescott. He should have just taken the old quarterback slide, but he wanted to get an extra 2 yards, and I get that. But when he tried to get those extra 2 yards, what took place was tragic. I don't want to show the video. It's terrible. But what took place was, I think that he has a couple of fractured bones, an ankle that's all messed up, and wow, it could be the end of his career. When that took place, I heard for him. I really did. And that pain did not go away for quite some time. And in fact, I still feel such a heaviness for him. I mean, I feel in a sense like, wow, I mean, that's not good. And, you know, this guy was doing everything that he could to become the better quarterback, and he was doing a great job. It doesn't matter whether I'm a Cowboy fan or not. The point is, I'm pro-social. I love people, and I want to see people do better. And when someone is trying as hard as Dak Prescott, I applaud that. And so I thought Daryl would want to chime in on Dak. I mean, I was brought to tears within just a few seconds after that took place, and I saw Jerry Jones and his family. They were just all upset, and last year's coach, that is, of the Cowboys, he was out there on the field because now he plays, I mean, he's one of the coaches for the Giants, and he came over and hugged the current coach of the Cowboys. And, I mean, all of the players from both teams, they were out there, and it was a beautiful sight, that is, of people showing a great deal of empathy. They love the guy. And I love to see people compete in a manner to where they can love one another. And if you know anything about football, it's a hard-hitting game. Lots of things are said, but at the end of the day, if someone gets hurt, they really, really demonstrate how much they are for one another. With that said, Daryl, jump in and share your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I'd like to share a few thoughts. I've been you might say, a Cowboy fan for the better part of my life, a Cowboys fan. I've always lived in Texas, probably always will. It's not that I have anything against anywhere else. I just find myself here. I like it here just fine. But it kind of makes me partial to the state, and the state teams and all that kind of stuff. Probably if I lived elsewhere, I'd be a fan of whatever team they had. But I've been a little less of a fan this year for my own personal reasons. But setting all that aside, because that's not what you're talking about here at all. I see an individual who suffered an injury that does, you can look at it a couple of different ways. You can say, okay, well, this guy's a millionaire, big deal. And look at all the outpouring of love for him. And so many people get hurt or whatever, and they don't get that kind of outpouring. They don't know where their next check's coming from and that sort of thing. But really, none of that, to me, enters the equation here. You've got someone in pain. You've got someone not just in the pain of an injury, but you've got someone in the pain of knowing what this means, because he was committed. He was committed to life itself and his place in life. And a lot of people realize that. And when I saw the looks on people's faces, it gets to me, because I think that's what happens. That's what people understand. And all the other stuff kind of should, at least, and for most, I think, does kind of go out the window, and your heart goes out to the individual. And what a beautiful, in a way, what a beautiful model for all of the world, for that matter. What if we looked at one another that way? And we don't all find ourselves in a position like that where the whole world's looking at us, so to speak.
Right.
But someone is. And if someone cares, it makes all the difference in the world.
It really does.
And I know that personally. If I'm hurting or going through something and people acknowledge that and show their care and their empathy for me, it's everything at the time. I mean, it means so much. And in this case, you see, it's not something that people are they're making a face and trying to make it look like they care. It's obvious, And like I said, that's, I don't know, what a good lesson to learn if we don't identify with that. Because I started to say we don't have it, but I'm convinced we all have empathy, but it just shows up more in some than others, maybe.
Let me share this, and we do have a guest on tonight, and he's awesome. Okay, second to none. There are writers who are actually psychologists. This is what they are saying, and I'm reading this. Empathy is the ability to recognize, understand, and share the thoughts and feelings of another person. And the reason that I'm not saying, it's this particular person, typically what's happening, that is in a lot of the rights, WRITES, you have shared work, and so it's the product of many, and so a redactionist will come along and state things and in a way that represents all of them. And so empathy is the ability to recognize, understand, and share the thoughts and feelings of another person, animal, or fictional character. Developing empathy is crucial for establishing relationships and behaving compassionately, and that is something that we did see at that football game. It involves experiencing someone else's point of view rather than just one's own, and enables pro-social or helping behaviors that come from within rather than being forced. Would that not be a great thing to happen during this political year? Wow. Some surveys indicate that empathy is on the decline in the United States. It should be obvious. And elsewhere, findings that motivate parents, schools, and communities to support programs that help people of all ages enhance and maintain their ability to walk in each other's shoes. And how often do I talk about, wow, you need to look through someone else's glasses, walk in someone else's shoes for a while, and maybe you can connect. In other words, I'm not asking anyone to become a theist or an atheist, agnostic, or anything like that. I'm simply asking people to have a great degree of empathy, because when you look through someone else's lenses, when you walk in someone else's shoes, you might be able to become what's called a compassionist. And so, with that said, let's bring in, first of all, Terry, and I'm going to allow you to introduce our guest. Terry, go for it.
Hey, good evening. I apparently am incapable of empathy towards the football game because I don't watch football. So
Shame on you.
I know, and I'm wearing that shame properly, I hope. You did remind me of something though, and I'll just be very brief here. When I December 23rd of 24 years ago, fell while ice skating and banged the back of my head. I woke up. I knew that I was awake 3 days later in a hospital in intensive care. Lost a whole lot of myself in the process, and I to the point where I couldn't control my bladder. I was vomiting all over myself. I couldn't see straight. My vision was partly gone. I lost my sense of smell, lost my sense of taste. I was arguably creepy smart before then, and I was pretty normal afterwards. 6 months later, I went back to work, and we used to raise chickens and ducks for eggs. This is where I'm going. And through that whole time, I knew, because I'm a survivor instructor, I knew that I couldn't afford to feel bad for myself. In the middle of a nightmare like that, you can't really afford that time, because it's just a dark road to go down. This woman came and she wanted to buy duck eggs, and I didn't know anything about her. And my kids were not home, and my wife wasn't home when she dropped by, and she was a very pleasant person, and I gave her a couple dozen eggs, and she paid me for them, and we stood outside and talked about things for a while. Then she told me that she had gotten Lyme's disease. And after, on the downside, on the backside of Lyme's disease, there was a whole bunch of things that she'd lost. She'd lost cognitive ability, she'd lost, sheared that right off, and all these other things that she lost. She lost control of motor functions, which I had. I mean, I couldn't throw a ball for about 20 years after only very recently was able to actually work out the overhand throw. I used to be able to pitch baseball. And we stood outside, and as she's telling me this, I broke down and cried like a little kid. And then we both stood outside and cried together for about 5 minutes, because there's something, when you see somebody that understands the course you've been through, you can afford that. And to borrow the line from the Bible, we comfort each other with the comfort wherewith we're comforted by God. Well, by God or by whatever, it was great to be able to be there for her and to be able to help her at that moment, and each other be decent people. And by the way, I'll leave it at that. So I didn't watch the football game because I apparently don't care, but I do kind of get the whole empathy thing. And Tassie Rooker, we've known each other through Facebook for a really long time. My best guess about 10 years, give or take. We've been in and out of different philosophy type groups. Both of us seem to have a similar intolerance for people who who oversimplify things and who aren't empathetic, I should imagine, is the word we're looking for. So I'd sure like to hear from them, and let me be quiet. So Cassie, welcome in and have a word with people. You got on mute, whatever it is.
Okay, the control room is letting me know that we see no microphone for Tassie. And so I'm Mic needs to be turned on.
It's going to work out like that football game did for me otherwise.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully we'll get him in.
Yeah. Okay, Tassie, when you can jump in, you're a super cool guy, and you have a lot to say that we all listen to and read, right? And so just jump in, interrupt at any point in time during this particular show, because we want to try to make sense of this and that. Thanks for being here. But try to work on the audio so you can jump in. We really want you in here. Let me state a few more things about empathy, and I'm reading these particular things. I want to share my own personal view maybe a little bit later on in the show, but most psychologists believe that if you're developing empathy is something that helps us cooperate with others. It's the thing that helps us to build friendships, make moral decisions, and intervene when we see others being bullied. Humans begin to show signs of empathy in infancy, and the trait develops steadily through childhood and adolescence. Still, most people are likely to feel greater empathy for people like themselves. Let me repeat that. Most people are likely to feel greater empathy for people like themselves and may feel less empathy for those outside of their family, community, ethnicity, or race. This is one of the reasons that we should do, hopefully we will do some shows on in and out groups. That would be good. So the question is, why is empathy important? Empathy helps us to connect. In other words, so many of us are disconnected from what's going on. That's not good. We're disconnected, let's say, from people within our own group. I had a gentleman the other day. He's part of a sizable modality, and he said, "You're right." He said, "This is my in-group, and I don't socialize. I don't have any connection with anyone outside of my in-group, and that's not good for me." And so at least he, could see the benefits of, namely, reaching out and trying to develop a sense of seeing what is outside of his axis of thought or his circle of discourse, right? The idea is that we need to make that circle of discourse as large as we can get it. So empathy helps us to connect and help others, but like other traits, it may have evolved with a selfish motive. No one here has been selfish but me. Using others as a social antenna to help detect danger. From an evolutionary perspective, creating a mental model of another person's intent is critical. The arrival of an interloper, for example, could be deadly. So developing sensitivity to the signals of others could be life-saving. Babies display an understanding that people's actions are guided by intentions and are able to act on that understanding before they are 18 months old. Think about that. I mean, we're talking about infants. They display an understanding that people's actions are guided by intentions and are able to act on that understanding before they are 18 months old. Daryl, I know a lot of adults that may not be that mature. Does that make sense to anyone here but me?
It makes perfect sense to me because it just kind of confirms what I said a few moments ago. I'm convinced that we all have empathy. It gets smothered, it gets lost, it gets, we lose track of it, but it's there. And if we can discover it, I think it opens a much better world to us and to those around us.
But here's something that may seem shocking. Babies display, and I'm reading the same thing, and understanding that people's actions are guided by intentions and are able to act on that understanding before they are 18 months old, including trying to comfort a parent. Think about that. More advanced reasoning about other people's thoughts develop around the age of 5 or 6, and research shows that parents who promote and model empathy raise more empathetic children. And so the question would be, can we increase, namely, our empathy? Let's say that we adults, let's pretend for the sake of argument that not all of us, well, it's actually true that all adults have areas in their lives whereas they didn't grow up. In other words, just as much as we're waiting for children to develop, there are some things that we adults do. We're trying to hide those areas in our lives that did not develop. In other words, sometimes when you're speaking to an adult, for the sake of just toying with this idea, please understand that that adult has some issues. And these issues are somewhat like this. There are areas in which each and every one of us, we just fail to develop. In other words, we fail to grow up. And so in one sense, we are an adult, and in another sense, we're still a child, right? And so that's interesting, okay? Researchers believe that people can choose to cultivate and prioritize empathy. People who spend more time with individuals different from themselves. Boy, I wish our politicians would get this. When I'm watching what took place today, I'm not seeing empathy. I mean, I have to be honest, I haven't heard anything about this nominee, that is, for the Supreme Court, that I would say, yes, I would vote for her. But just to have the kind of hearing that they're having, for the most part, with everyone jabbing this one and that one, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, think about the last hearing. That was held for Brett. I mean, you would think that there wasn't a grown-up in the room, or am I wrong? And so I'm simply, I don't want to be condescending. Please forgive me for making that statement, but maybe there's a bit of truth to that. And I'm simply saying that what would happen if we spent more time with individuals different from ourselves? According to these psychologists, you would adopt a more empathetic outlook toward others. That would be interesting if Jesus would have said some of these things, but this is why I keep encouraging people to look at what others are saying. Not just Jesus. And so I'm not trying to poo-poo, that is, your Jesus narrative or the person or the God Jesus. I'm simply trying to offer an idea here. And I think that we do have Tassie back in. Let's see if we can get Tassie unmuted. If Tassie can unmute, we can see the microphone. Yeah, that's good. Tassie, welcome to the show. I can barely hear you. Terry, can you hear Tassie?
Yeah, just way in the background, unfortunately.
And my understanding that Tassie,
We'll work this thing out yet.
he's a wonderful musician, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Can you hear me now? Hello.
I can hear you a little bit better. It's a little bit muddied.
Still can't hear me? Check.
Sounds muffled.
Check.
Maybe you're not being empathetic, Daryl.
To the microphone. I'm sure Tassie's a wonderful
I
person.
think I'll have to probably do my laptop.
That sounds pretty good.
It's sounding better and better.
That's a horrible lag. I said that like 20 seconds ago.
Okay, I can't
My
make
internet
that out.
connection is really quick too.
Okay, I'm having a
To
difficult.
be fair here, it does take a little bit of getting used to, because you have
Sure.
to mute the YouTube feed, and you have to do all the other junk just to see. I can hear myself talking through Tassie's computer right now, which is weird. But so yeah, it's a
Did he say that he was going to try to use his laptop and come back in?
yeah.
Okay, that sounds great.
We'll see what happens, but
Sounds good. Let me get back to talking about empathy for a moment while Tassie tries to.
Check that. Is that better?
It sounds really muddy. It's difficult for me to hear. I can't understand the words that you're using. It's that muddied.
Test.
Okay.
give it a try, Tassie. See if it comes through.
Okay, I'm going to continue. What we're talking about tonight is empathy. So, according to these psychologists, if we spend more time with individuals different from ourselves, we tend to adopt a more empathetic outlook toward other people. That's positive. Other research finds that reading novels can help foster the ability to put ourselves in the minds of others. Hint, read. Okay, meditation has also been shown to help cultivate brain states that increase empathy. So that's a good thing, right? Okay, when it comes to, let's say, relationships, okay, the ability to convey support for a partner. In other words, if you're talking with your wife, or your husband, it's very, very important to feel what they feel. In other words, I keep talking about the difference between linguistic and non-linguistic elements, and empathy plays a major role. In other words, I've told people who are politically uptight, I said, if you can empathize to a degree with Trump, put yourself in his shoes and look through his lens for a few minutes, you might be able to understand better what he's trying to do and say. Not that you would agree with him, but I'm just saying sometimes that helps. And so the ability to convey support for a partner, relative, or a friend is crucial to establishing positive relationships. Empathy enables us to establish rapport with another person, make them feel that they are being heard. That's very important. When someone is talking, you don't want to just listen, but you want to make them feel like they are actually being heard. That's the thing that should be done, right? Okay. and through words and body language mimic their emotions. Perspective taking, or the I was going to go further in this, and I'll come back to this. Let me skip a couple of these things. Daryl, did you have anything to say about what I just read?
Well, not much more than I agree with you. I mean, to be able to connect with someone to this degree, I know from experience, for one thing, is very meaningful, but at the same time, it makes a lot of sense. So I'll just leave it at that for now.
Sure. Okay. Step up to the plate, Terry, and talk to me.
Well, you've soundly put me in my place this evening and let me know that if I only cared as much as a small child about football, I would grow in empathy. So I stand corrected in that respect. No, it's an interesting topic, and then what's interesting, maybe you guys remember back when we didn't know each other as well. I brought something up to you, and I was trying to explain something about what I learned working in prison. And the first thing when I went into prison, the first thing that the gate guard told me, first day, he sat me down in a chair and just read me the riot act. You know, he wanted me to be scared. I don't scare easily. I just get frustrated. But I listened to him because I was going into a prison, and I was going in alone, and I was going in with a bunch of tools and stuff, and I needed to be checked and all this other stuff. But he said, these aren't people like you think of people. They're not like us. They look like us. They act like us. They're not like us. And it disturbed me a lot because that burst my good Christian, everyone can be saved by Jesus bubble. And it brought me to this place of, I didn't agree with him, by the way. He didn't change my mind in a 30-minute talk by any means. Interestingly enough, during that 30-minute talk, the prison went into lockdown because somebody tried to break out. And so everyone was running around like crazy. And so, yeah, it was a good time to, it made me feel so comfortable. Then I just went in on my own, and immediately, first place I had to go to a building. I'd never been anywhere inside the prison, so I only knew which building I was supposed to go to, and I went there and I locked everything up, and the guards watched me, and I went inside and walking down a corridor, and some guys that are chained together get up and fan across the hall in front of me to block my way, and I thought, oh wow, this is all. I'm not an hour into this experience yet. I'm thinking, wow, this is I got to work here for years, and I haven't gotten through the first hour without being having all this junk happen. And by the way, turned out that wasn't that unusual of a day. But what I learned from there, and I brought this up to you guys before, is that, and it scared me a little bit about society, because I found out that there are the people that, I mentioned this to Daryl, maybe you remember when I said this, but we have a piece of cake, and I get the knife, and I'm going to cut the cake in half, and I'm going to give you half, Daryl, and I'm going to take half for myself. So I cut, and I try. I mean, I'm pretty good with a knife. I try, and inevitably one piece is going to be bigger than the other one, unless I'm just waste way too much time at it. This is like Chidi in The Good Place with his moral ethic dilemmas that he could never get beyond. And I look at the thing, so I deliberately make sure one piece is bigger than the other, and then I give you the large piece. I'm absolved. I'm okay, because I care about you, and I want to make sure that you have the larger piece and I have the smaller piece, and that way I know that I've done my job to try to be ethical and try to be fair in this world. And what I found is the average inmate thinks the exact opposite of that. They make sure that the cut goes off center, and they take the biggest piece every single damn time. And sometimes they might take them both. They might cut it in half and take yours too, in which case, it doesn't really matter where they put the cut. And I found that out, and I thought, this is disturbing about the inmates. But then when I took that lens and I turned and I focused on society and how society worked, I went, wow, this is the way people handle traffic lights. This is how people handle, blocking aisles in grocery stores with their cart. Take a cart and turn it at 45-degree angle, and then get between the cart and the widest spot, so the entire angle is blocked by a single person in a cart. And these people will do that every time. It's almost like an animal response in some people to be that person, the person that always wants the most, that always wants the best. And it isn't like they're striving for the best. They're out there taking the best. And this abysmal lack of empathy, it's a frightening thing to behold, but it's a frightening thing to acknowledge. It took me a long time. Again, I was a good altruistic young pup when I went in there the first time. I was young and healthy and athletic, and I had 3 kids, and life was good, and everything was working out, and I was at the top of my field. And I didn't want to believe that people were like that. And when I learned that people were like that, it was a hard pill to swallow. It was extremely difficult. I don't know if this is making any sense or if it's connecting, but I mean, the hope is that, that if we all came together, we could have an honest and fair election. We could have an election based on, principles and values. But that isn't how things work. That's just how we wish it was. But somehow figuring out how to accommodate the reality of the thing it's a whole nother plane of thought altogether.
Thanks for sharing. I do want to read a little bit of what Steve Taylor, he's a PhD, he states, empathy is one of human beings' highest qualities. Empathy is the root of most of the behavior that we associate with goodness. And I want to read that again and read it slowly, because I want people to digest what Dr. Taylor is saying. Empathy is the root of most of the behavior that we associate with goodness. Wow. It's the root of compassion and altruism, self-sacrifice and charity. Conversely, a lack of empathy is the root of most destructive and violent behavior. In fact, everything that we associate with evil. Now, this is a psychologist talking. A lack of empathy with victims makes crime possible. Listen to this. A lack of empathy with victims makes crime possible. A lack of empathy with other human beings makes warfare possible. A lack of empathy enables psychopaths to treat other human beings horribly so, as objects who have no value except as a means of satisfying their desires. You can think of empathy as a channel which connects human beings to one another. Compassion is what flows through the channel, and the result of this compassion is altruism, selfless action which aims to alleviate the suffering or further the development of others. I don't know about you, but this is good stuff. This is not John 3:16. This is not Genesis 1:1. This is not Ephesians 2:8. But this is actually Dr. Taylor actually unpacking a little bit on those who have empathy as opposed to those who don't have empathy. And the question tonight would be, why are we not focused more on trying to make sure that people are developing lots and lots of empathy? And we can talk about some people don't have the capacity for this, but I'm simply saying that within the framework of politics, within the framework of religion, within the framework of the great debate, within the framework of everything that we do in society, my question is, why would we not focus in on what Dr. Taylor is sharing? Empathy is one of human beings' highest qualities. Is that true? If it is, empathy is the root of most of the behavior that we associate with goodness. Daryl, talk to me tonight. I mean, if empathy is that powerful in our lives, why would we not be nuancing this day in and day out with people?
Well, yeah, I'd like to respond and also kind of go back and respond to what Terry said. Um, you know, for one thing, it's a little known fact for some reason. I mean, it's like it's hidden. It's like we squash it down, and maybe more so in our society than others. I don't know. I don't know statistics on this, but uh, it's something that in order for it to make sense rather than just as words. And this, I'm going to take issue with Jesus because I followed Jesus for a lot of years, but I followed Jesus. It was on the paper, in the book, and he had his set of rules. As a matter of fact, at one point you read and he says, "This is my commandment, that you love one another." And I had to think about that a little bit. What exactly is that saying? Okay, wife, I commend you to love me. And now I'm loved. Come on. That's not the way this thing works. It's either something that we actually have in our makeup or it's not. And I think the facts are that it is, or the fact is that it is a part of our makeup. And we have, as I stated earlier, I think we've just gotten out of touch with it. And it might fail again and again in our mind, in what we see in response. But I don't think it's ever a failure. Personally, if you actually connect with empathy, and I'm not going to say, because it's not a command, it's not something you can say, okay, you need to start doing this. It's something that you have to recognize and discover, what it does. Because over time, I think it can change a lot of things. But the thought came to my mind of the salmon. I've always heard that the salmon swims upstream. And honestly, that doesn't make any sense. Why don't you go the easy way? Come on, salmon. Why are you going to all this trouble? Well, there's something about it that drives the salmon to do that, that motivates the salmon to do that, and there's reward at the end of the swim. At least that's the way I understand the way of the salmon. And we're not so different. I'll go back to something my electronics teacher taught me. It's one of the greatest lessons I've ever been taught. He taught me about electricity, and he said this simple thing. It's maybe the first thing you need to know. And here's the way he said it. He said, electricity is like people. It follows the path of least resistance. And that's where we find ourselves most of the time. Empathy is a challenge. It's something that can actually, in my thinking, cause us to grow and mature. And so if it requires a little swimming upstream to actually see what we're talking about, then what's wrong with that? And, it's, to me, it can become such a way of life that you don't know any other way. And you're not looking for so much for the results or the reciprocation. You're just enjoying the ride, the swim.
Okay, there is a big difference between commanding someone to love and saying to people, listen, empathy is one of human beings' highest qualities. In fact, if you empathize, it is at the root, or is the root, of the behavior that we associate with goodness. I mean, that's quite telling, right? It's the root of compassion, the very thing that Jesus was trying to articulate. Subtract the command, right? And altruism and self-sacrifice and charity. Conversely, a lack of empathy is the root of most destructive and violent behavior. In fact, everything that we associate with evil, a lack of empathy with victims, makes crime possible. A lack of empathy with other human beings makes warfare possible. A lack of empathy enables psychopaths to treat other human beings callously, as objects who have no value except as a means of satisfying their desires. You can think of empathy as a channel which connects human beings to one another. Compassion is what flows through that channel. And the result of this compassion is altruism, selfless action which aims to alleviate the suffering or further the development of others. What is perhaps less well recognized that there are two fundamentally different kinds of empathy. The first is what might be called shallow empathy. In fact, this is the most common definition of empathy, as the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes, or to see the world through someone else's eyes, or to read their emotions. In other words, empathy is seen as a cognitive ability along with the same lines as the ability to imagine future scenarios or to solve problems based upon previous experience. As the psychologist Paul Gilbert points out, empathy in this sense doesn't necessarily imply goodness. According to Gilbert, empathy is what makes torture possible. Without empathy, a torturer would have no concept of suffering he is causing because he can put himself in another person's shoes. He knows what he is causing. He knows that he is causing pain. In other words, the second type of empathy is what I call, that is according to the psychologist, what I call deep empathy. This is more than just a cognitive ability. It's the ability not to just imagine, but to actually feel what another person is experiencing. It's the ability to actually enter the mind space of another person so that you can sense their feelings and emotion. In a sense, your identity merges with theirs. The separateness between you and them fades away. Your self-boundary melts away so that in a sense, or to an extent, you become them. Wow. If you experience deep empathy, then it becomes impossible to inflict pain or suffering on other people, at least intentionally. In deep empathy, you recoil from other people's pain in the same way that you would recoil from your own pain. You are reluctant to harm them in the same way that you are reluctant to harm yourself. I've got so much more to say. What say either of you?
Real quick, Tassie, I think is trying to knock on the door again.
Yeah.
And
Knock. We're
following that up,
opening up the
ironically,
door.
Semi-ironically, we were having this conversation, you and I, when we first talked, whether we knew we were having this. You might have known we were having this conversation. I asked you how you were doing, and you asked me how I was doing, and I said, that's the best day of my life, which, is kind of a lie because it's the only day of my life. But just the point being that love never fails. Well, if love never fails, I mean, do you dare use something that powerful? Because here's the deal. We were saying before the show, if I take the risk of being decent to somebody that doesn't really have decency coming their way as an equation, am I willing to take the repercussions of being decent towards somebody who is malevolent? And I'm going to back out and let Tassie chat because he's here all the way with us now.
Jump in, Tassie.
Check. Can you hear me all right?
I can. Yeah,
Sounds
that's
good.
wonderful.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I figured my laptop would be fine. I have a high-end gaming PC and I haven't got it set up for Skype or anything yet. So it is what it is.
Coming
My
in loud and
understanding is that you are a great musician. Is that true?
I travel around the country, or had been traveling around the country. Yeah, I pretty much played all around, anywhere you can name, about every state.
Wow.
And outside.
Do you play the drums or piano or guitar or what?
I play piano.
Piano?
I actually play guitar and I play bass and other things too. But yeah,
Love to
I
hear
had
you.
college and I actually went and had college lessons from a college professor when I was like in junior high and stuff. So, and then I continued on through college after having lessons from college.
Right.
I'd love to hear you play.
I'm okay. There's videos out there of me.
Tonight
I'm
we're
sure you
talking
wanna-
about empathy. What say you concerning empathy?
Yeah, this is hard because it's hard to contextualize where you guys are at in the conversation
Sure.
because I haven't been listening. I've had it off, so I don't know what direction of empathy or that you're going in. Empathy about what, or just empathy overall in general.
Yeah. I mean, from your point of view, how does empathy play a role in your life would be probably the better question.
Well, a lot of it comes across a lot of us experience empathy without realizing it with people at first, I think. Just when we try to take on something new, like say me in music, I want to try a new style, or let's say I play blues for 10 years, 15 years, and all of a sudden I want to start learning jazz. Well, it's one thing to learn the notes and the technique, the intonation, the different scales and things like that. But then you're just robotically repeating it, just like in politics, you're going to have a talking point, so to speak, and it's going to come off as a not a feeling, not feeling what you're saying, but just stating and the knowledge based on it. You actually have to get a feel for it other than just learning the knowledge and technique. And I think that's where empathy starts, is when you take on anything and you're trying to learn it and you're trying to go beyond just repeating it, but actually getting in it and feeling it, living it, I guess, which is, part of empathy is that the fact that you do go or understand because you've had the experience to a certain sense.
Yeah.
And I guess that's just, try to take it to everything and come across.
That's
I
good.
guess.
That's good. Do me a favor and tilt your camera down just a bit so we can see a little bit more of, of
Yeah,
you.
I'm just laying on the bed and I've got my big Dream Weaver back there.
Yeah.
Dream Catcher.
Yeah, that looks good. That looks great. That looks great. Okay, now you and Terry have lots of conversations. Where do your conversations typically go with Terry?
I'm not sure. I'm more of a typer than I am a speaker. I'm not very good at public speaking, I wouldn't say. I'm more the type of afterthought guy where I'll type something, I'll have an inspiration. I get inspiration off people. I'll get inspiration off Terry. A lot of times he'll say something and I'll be like, oh, okay. And then I'll type something, then 3 minutes later I'll go, oh, okay. Well, wait a minute, let me add to that. I do that a lot. I correct things, but I'm not a very witty on the spot guy. It's not me.
Well, I tell you what, you're so humble here. I really enjoy that kind of person. And thank you so much for joining us and stay in here. Let me read a little bit more of where I was going with empathy. One of the interesting things about these two types of empathy, and we're talking about deep empathy and shallow empathy. According to this particular psychologist, Dr. Taylor, one of the interesting things about these two types of empathy is that they are not necessarily related. This is clear from Paul Gilbert's example of torture. And I'm not going to go any further into what Dr. Taylor is stating. I think that I have read enough, and I'm hoping that those of you who have been listening to the show tonight would just take time enough to digest what was said concerning empathy. I think that human beings, if we do understand to a degree what shallow empathy is, and if we can look at what Dr. Taylor is saying, and I'm going to read this again for some of you guys who are just joining us. The first paragraph that is in this particular right, W-R-I-T-E, is empathy is one of human beings' highest qualities. Empathy is the root of most of the behavior that we associate with goodness. It's the root of compassion and altruism, self-sacrifice, and charity. Conversely, a lack of empathy is the root of most destructive and violent behavior. In fact, everything that we associate with evil. A lack of empathy with victims makes crime possible. A lack of empathy with other human groups makes warfare possible. A lack of empathy enables psychopaths to treat other human beings callously as objects who have no value except as a means of satisfying their desires. You can think of empathy as a channel which connects human beings to one another. Compassion is what flows through that channel, and the result of this compassion is altruism, selfless action, which aims to alleviate the suffering or further the development of others. And so the reason that I'm talking about this, I am concerned about the lack of empathy that is within the Republican Party and also the Democratic Party. It's like, wow, where is the empathy? Where
May I
is
say
that
something on that?
connectedness, if that makes sense? Okay, go for it, Tassie.
I think what you hear a lot of times in psychology is like when you hear the term sociopath, they always say what a sociopath is incapable of. And I think the problem is a lot of times there's not one category for one type of thing. I mean, humans are so complex that I believe that you could have a sociopath who does know empathy. They still follow the traits of a sociopath, but your most successful sociopath, being your top politicians, are going to be the guys who absolutely understand empathy. And that's why they know how to work humans so well, because they definitely know empathy, but they don't care. They have no morals. If they are a bad politician or an evil person, they still act as a sociopath would. I think your failing sociopath is the base set sociopath who truly is incapable of empathy, because then they're a bad sociopath because they're not successful at what they're attempting to do. If that makes any sense.
Sure.
I may be wrong about that. But
Go for it, Terry.
Quick jump in here, by the way. What you're saying there, Cassie. By the way, the conversation we were having today on his wall on a topic that moved around a little bit, as I mentioned in passing, that Christian song by Steve Green, where he talked about all creation has a language, words that say what must be said, and it goes on and it culminates in a single line: find the words. And dude, you're good enough at this. You really are. You're just, it's something that it takes a while to catch up to, but you're good at words. And this is the same as writing. It's just not being intimidated by the idea that anyone on the planet can look at you and go, who is that guy? But which, they can always ask. But the thing about that, the creepy part in the series Hannibal, Gillian Anderson is playing Hannibal's psychiatrist, and she says to him this rather chilling line that stuck with me out of the whole series. She said, "You wear the best person suit that I've ever seen," and that's people who are really good at being completely dissociated are really good at pretending like they're human beings. One quick addition, I'm going to shut up and let other people talk. It occurred to me, and why it didn't occur to me until this year, I don't know. But when you look at the House of Representatives and you look at the Senate and you look at the president, what you're looking at in a country of 330 million or so people are the only people that we have given the right to choose to kill people. That should scare the heck out of you. I mean, these are the people who can legally kill people. They can do drone strikes in other countries. They can drop bombs. They can send people to war. These are the only people that we've given that right to. You know, which I
Okay,
guess,
but bear with me just for a moment. What if I became president, and if I took my compassionism and I chose diplomats to do something in every country that is to increase the multiple kinds of empathy that we can have for each other. In other words, if I create, that is, a pathway of connecting or reconnecting, then we can have dialogue. Then we can understand, that is, the pain that other people are going through. We can see where they're coming from. We don't have to agree, but at least it gets the ball going, rolling. And so I guess my point on this show this evening is that in this country, there seems to be a lack of empathy. And I'm talking about the shallow and the deep. It seems like, I think that Tassie was onto something a few minutes ago. It seems like people understand what that is, but they don't want that to take place because they see the benefit of getting more votes by taking a different pathway. And so you can disconnect, that is, two large groups of people. You can disconnect the Republicans from the Democrats and split, namely a nation, for your own self-interest. And so, you know, we do have people who know a lot about this and who do have empathy, but yet they choose to play another role. Does that make any sense?
It causes me to have a question concerning this. I like what you said, Tessie, but I have a question. You know, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. You know, for example, commanding love. You know, this is my commandment: love one another. You know, if I were to command, there's 4 people here, and let's just say, look, my command is that we got to love each other. And it would create a thing of, okay, I'm going to try real hard, or if that's what I'm supposed to do, I'll go ahead and do it. And I think we all would know that love really doesn't work that way. So my question would be, in this scenario where you've got someone that knows empathy and uses it, in the way that you're talking about, the question, and Dr. Jones, you somewhat answered it, but I guess I want to take it a little further. You know, they choose not to empathize. Is it a choice, or is it something that they've actually lost touch with? I mean, there's a kind of a just a question mark there in my mind of, can we actually dismiss the actual thing itself, or is it something that, if we really have it, I mean, what can you do about it, really?
I guess my quick answer would be, if you offered someone, let's say, they knew that they could have $1 million if they let go, namely, of their empathy, that is, toward a certain group of people. This happens a lot, that is, in communities like ours. You know, we have people who are very kind people, but yet at the same time, since they don't live in a particular community, they don't mind owning the property that becomes part of the slumlording business in this community. And instead of exercising, and understanding what empathy would do and becoming a compassionist and not allowing it to go that far, the dollar, in a sense, leads them in another direction. There was a comment made by someone, MDVIZ1, what makes you think this is not happening already? You seem biased in your belief. If you have something to put on the table, whereas we can see, measure to any degree where Democrats and Republicans are showing a great deal of empathy, that is in their conversations and in their relationships. And if you can see a lot of connectedness, I would like for you to simply write that down. I'm all ears. I would love to read what you have to say. And so I don't mind being corrected on this show in real time. And so please add that to the chat if you would. I didn't mean to interrupt the realm of thought going on here. And so any one of you three, just jump in.
Well, I like your answer. I'd like to hear Tassie's response to it. Is this because that makes sense to me? I mean, it'd be like having I don't know. I'm trying to think of something I could compare it to, because I guess I'm thinking more on a personal level here. If you really care about someone and you have a choice to make concerning them or something else, and you choose the something else. Is that what we're talking about here? That maybe we can squash that down and eventually lose those empathetic feelings, for lack of a better word. And I'm directing that toward you, Tassie. Is that kind of what you were? Your explanation was?
No, I think like when you're facing bias, that you have a gain and a loss, and the problem is with the conversation I've been watching politically since Trump's been in office or whatever, and we've had such a partisan divide. You have the problem where we start out and people said their statements, and then the other side said their statements. And then, maybe half a year into it, people start saying and putting out, well, it's because of his bias. And the other side says, well, it's because of their bias. And then that becomes the household name that the conversation is this side's bias and that side's bias. So now we need to get past that bias and realize what we're ultimately trying to reach as a middle ground. And there's a chance, there's a window, kind of like, I don't know, this is kind of funny, but like hip hop had a chance to continue on and expand, but it didn't. It turned into Bone Thug rap as it went down no. But anyway, there's a certain point where the conversation could have went a different way, but now the conversation's been dismissed and the bias has become, well, he's just biased and that other side is biased, so now we can't get past it. And then empathy doesn't even come into the mix at that point, and nobody even tries to understand. And even if they felt it, even if there's been a certain feeling, I've watched centrists and libertarians from the Democratic to the libertarian conservative side, all those different types of walks of life and in between, where there's been chances that I've seen in the first couple of years that they met common ground on. As time went on, I'm not seeing that common ground anymore. And now you have people saying, centrism is dead and everything else. And that's scary. That's a losing part. You lose that centrist ground and we're not going towards a good place. So I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
I'm trying to be abstract politically. I have a lot of strong political views, and it's hard for me to be abstract with it. And I'm trying to be as abstract as I can with it. So I don't know. Hopefully,
You're
I'm not
making
coming
sense.
out as horrible
Yeah.
mysticism.
I guess what I'm saying tonight, to go back to this person's comment, they said in reply to what I asked them to do at some point, empathy has to be placed aside in order for pragmatism. Pragmatic differences are where the conflict is not the empathy for one another. I so disagree. When you're having a conversation, let's say, and please understand that I'm multi-axial. In other words, what that means is I don't live as if everything rests upon one axis of thought. So I can talk to someone else who's multi-axial. That would be Bob Graves. We can have a wonderful conversation, and we can disagree. But in that conversation, one of the things that he's doing, in both a shallow and a deep way, he shows a great deal of empathy, and so do I. And so we build, that is, the kinds of connections that keep the conversation going and keep the relationship solid. And that's why Bob Graves and I have a very functional relationship. It's very adaptive. It's not maladaptive. And I think that if you'll just do a little bit of research, you're going to find that when you have this kind of connectedness that I'm speaking about tonight, it's how people become functional. Because a dysfunctional person is a person who lacks, first of all, empathy. It takes empathy to become or be functional. And so we have to massage that a bit. And so to have a conversation this evening, there has to be not just people talking, but you have to have people listening. In other words, each and every one of us, we have this internal lexicon, right? And we have the tendency, if I'm listening to Terry, as a human being, I have the tendency to simply listen to him and take how I have used, that is, words, how I understand words, and apply, that is, his usages within a framework of what I consider certain semantic domain fields to be. In other words, I would render him in a way that would be reading most of what I want to read into what he's saying. That is, if I didn't have empathy. With empathy, what one can do, one can actually exegete. That means that you can deal with what's there. In other words, you can sense, you can feel, because when you're speaking, it's not just the surface structure that you're trying to get at, the word itself. You're trying to get down into the deep structure, and you're trying to find out the intent. In this case would be the intent of Terry. In order to do that, it's going to require lots of non-linguistic elements. And so there's a lot more to this. And so when this starts taking place in conversations, it's like a lot of people will listen to Donald Trump, and I don't care whether you're a Trump fan or not. I'm not a Trump fan. But if you're trying to understand someone like Trump, for the most part, for most of his life, he's been a shock jock. He uses lots and lots of metaphor. He uses language in a very strange way. He's very much a blue-collar speaker, and so when he's speaking to a white-collar speaker, these two people tend to speak past each other. And so if you have a white-collar reporter trying to ask him certain things and he responds in a blue-collar sense, if there is not a great deal of empathy between the two, there's not going to be a great deal of understanding. And so I'm simply tonight trying to challenge people, that is, to have empathy for the sake of understanding what people mean, where they're coming from. In other words, my internal lexicon, if you will, it needs to expand. I don't know Tassie that well, but in time I hope to know him much better. And so his usage, that is, of words, I'm going to develop a much larger, if you will, lexical field. And in doing so, it's going to bless me. And part of that has to do with empathy. And so when you're trying to deal with conflict typically is a result of when people are talking, typically what happens that causes conflict, it's when people are not talking apples and apples. And if you do have a disagreement, and it's clear, typically people have a lot of respect. That is simply because you came to one axis of thought versus another axis of thought, and so those are compelling differences. But with empathy there, it simply builds, in a sense, this connectedness that does have a degree of compassion in that channel, in that vein, if that makes any sense. Am I just ranting? Am I making any sense to anybody but myself?
Let me
Hello.
toss something in here quickly.
Yeah.
Two things. Number one, I kind of stopped myself short. You talk about misunderstanding. I said that the Congress, the House, and the president have the right to kill people, and then I quit talking. I wasn't suggesting they needed to kill people.
Right.
I was merely suggesting they're the ones that can legally do so. The other thing, two things. One of them, really great piece of film, highly underrated in the Big Kahuna. Danny DeVito in the end, and you almost have to watch the movie to get up to what the monologue in the end, the 5-minute monologue in the end is about. But he pulls this young guy aside, and he's an old salesman, and he's had a rough life. But he has compassion. He has character. He calls it character, and he talks about what it takes to develop character. Fantastic thing, worth looking up, worth listening to, probably worth memorizing, even though I can't. But he tries to bring this young person to the altar of empathy, if you will. The young person, he's a young, revved up Christian who just wants to go out there and sort people out. And, well, you're saved, you're not. You're going to hell, you're going to heaven. And that's what he wants to do with the world. He wants to sort the whole world into that. At the same time, being a salesman working for this same company, and DeVito knows he can't be a salesman like him. He knows that people aren't that simple. He knows that people aren't that shallow that you can just divide them based on whether they're willing to say Black Lives Matter or, climate change is real or whatever the slogan is. I religiously refuse to say those things in any context, either in writing or here. I only said it here because I have to say it out loud. I don't say that because it triggers people. It brings them over to their thinking. He said that, he had a born again experience with Jesus Christ and yada, yada, yada. And on this date, people look for those slogans, and I refuse to give them those slogans because the only way we're ever going to connect is if we live past the slogans. That was thing number one. Thing number two, Trump landed in Florida today, I guess, and talked, I guess. I don't really care what Trump had to say in Florida. What I listened to, though, for 2 hours, fascinated, were the people lined up along the roadside, and Breitbart walked down the road with a camera and interviewed people, one after another for 2 hours. Fascinating piece of film. And to listen to these people talk and give their reasons for being there and speak out loud and speak plainly, and for the news media to actually record that and put it out in real time for people to see was a wonder to behold. I mean, I laughed, I cried, I drank a couple pints of water, and it was a good time just watching that, because these are real human beings. These aren't people with prepared slogans. This isn't a crowd. This isn't. I think I said with you, Tassie, in writing. They're not a congregation. They're an aggregation. They're a bunch of people brought together. Yep. No, go ahead. I'll be quiet. But that was my whole spiel.
No, that again, you've inspired me into that thought of thinking that's the key is a lot of people, when they don't understand something, they attack it from the slogans that they know. Like if you go on a post and you see somebody, well, look what Trump said, and he did this X today, and this and that, and we don't agree with this, of course, because this is how we're supposed to behave, and this is what we think. And but then, okay, then why is there millions of people following this guy? Is there really that many bad people? Are they all bad? Do we know why? And instead of looking at what you like or dislike about Trump or what he says that he likes, you what you're saying, you're talking about the people. You're not talking about Trump and what he said. You're talking, okay, those people are there for a reason. They've got things they're saying. So instead of looking at Trump first, maybe after all these years, and still seeing that people are hanging by this guy for some reason, let's reverse engineer from that angle and see what these people, and maybe from that angle, instead of just trying to attack, well, I don't understand why Trump takes a stance on this. Maybe you'll start to get the reason why he's taking certain stances on certain things if you're coming at it from other angles that don't even have to do with that particular thing. And you just start to look at the people and you start to, that's where you get into the whole thing. You get into the whole community. Then you see the lifestyle. Then you see the people in the Midwest, if you're a city person and don't understand any of that, or, it just, it cascades into a sort of understanding that people miss, that because people debate, they come, whether it be philosophy or anything else, they come at an angle to let's discuss this or that, or we're going to tackle this or that, or we're going to debate this or that. And a lot of understanding comes from not even attempting to do that, but just see, you happen upon something, and that's where you get your understanding from. Again, my little walkabout of trying to explain that. But yeah, if that makes any sense. That's what I'm getting from what you're saying when you talk about the crowd, and all.
I say, whoops, that does make sense.
I've enjoyed this. We are completely out of town. Not out of town. We're out of time. Excuse me. Tassie, would you come back Wednesday night and let's continue along the same pathway of this conversation? Because I think that people really need to start making sense of what's going on politically. And if we can try to make sense of what's being said by the politicians and by the people who are supporting these politicians, maybe we can do a lot of good for people. And it would be nice, in my opinion, if we could erase the lines that divide us. It would be wonderful to see people turning to each other instead of against each other. And so that's where I'm at. I'm a compassionist A to Z. But I've really enjoyed having you on the show. You've said some wonderful things, challenging things, to be honest with you. And let's get back into it. Could you be with us again Wednesday night?
Sure. That'd be fine. Sorry for the rough start. I'll have the laptop ready next
Okay.
time.
I'll say it later, but I'll say it again. No, thanks a lot for hanging in there and making your way through. I know it's a bit intimidating the first time around, or the 10th, but
Yeah,
Or the
that's
South sometimes.
well. Let's get out of here. This has been a show that hopefully is beneficial. And yes, he's always sharing this and that. I want to address some of the points that you're making. Let's do that Wednesday night. Come with a list of points that you would like to make. If you'd like to be on the show, we'd love to have you on. I'll send you a link. With that said, we're going to get out of here. We love each and every one of you very, very much. My intent is not to offend you. If I have, please forgive me. We love you very much. Take care.